relationships and addiction.
Yeah.
Do you think that? What do you think are the remedies against like addiction?
So there's two like instinctive levers people try to pull. The first is the legal lever. It's like what can we ban? The second is the cultural lever, which I think we neglect, to be honest, a little bit.
So bottoms up versus
Top down.
bottoms
Yeah.
up versus top down.
And
I think in general we're tending as a society towards a top down approach for everything, basically, which has been perpetuated by COVID, obviously, but
it was before COVID as well, to be fair.
That definitely, yeah. I think COVID definitely like sped things up, and also set a huge precedent for a lot more top down action, where a lot of people like complied. What do you think the bottoms up approach would look like in theory?
The problem is like the bottoms up approach is very slow, and like, for example, like NoFap is a good example. Like you have to find a mimetic way to spread a movement of people voluntarily giving up something that's short-term pleasurable in pursuit of a better long-term life, right? In a way, you almost have to have people like bottom out and realize. I've read awful stories online of guys with like a horrific porn addiction who just genuinely like lost like sensitivity and all these other aspects of their life, whatever. My concern is like, to what extent do you have to go through that as a culture to, you have to like see the long-term negative effects before people are willing to give up this positive pleasure, right? Our generation's dropping drinking in droves.
I think one theory I've heard about why that's happening is because they look at their parents drinking and like taking drugs, and they're like, well, that's like an old person thing to do. I'm not doing that. I'm new and cool. And I think there's a lot of rejection of like old traditions and old practices, but at the same time there's also, I think we're seeing a cultural shift, especially in young people, of and they're almost embracing as well things that are obviously not part of this part of a new ideology that is, like I guess like far leftist wokeism type thing. They're also rejecting that as well, but they're also, so there's a bit of an embrace of like traditional values, but there's also
doing it their own way,
but also doing it their own way, but also rejecting like things that their parents said and parents did.
Can I just say, by the way, like people like shit on Gen Z a lot, but like, how radical is it that a generation's like rejecting drinking? Like that is a core part of like pretty much every Western country's culture ever, like for all of history. Like that is a radical thing. I think they don't get enough credit for. It's like that is a big move,
Yeah.
So I see the downsides of this. I mean, let's say it's like having a nice little sip of whiskey. Like that's it takes like, that's like a big thing to reject. I also think part of it is economic. Like
I actually think it's a phase. I think it's the same thing that we saw with new atheism, because you would have said the exact same thing 20 years ago, which is how crazy that suddenly there's a new wave of young people that are just rejecting religion, not even rejecting it, but like anti it. But then we're seeing it come back a lot. I think we're going to see it come back.
But I think the difference there is like religion doesn't directly relate to your health in a way that I actually think. So there's a couple of reasons I think people are giving up alcohol.
Yeah.
One is this kind of like, okay, maybe there's like an emotional rejection of everything our parents are about. Two, economic. Going to the pub is fucking expensive. It's £7 for a pint. In a lot of places, like you can't just, especially if you're economically squeezed already, you can't just go for a pint and not think about it. Like it's £7 is like, the price of your lunch. You know what I mean? Like, and like, it's expensive, for one drink.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is people are getting very health obsessed in general. Like the access to high quality health information is huge. Like anyone can load up Huberman or like Brian Johnson or whatever. I mean, smoking wasn't even bad for you until like what, the 70s?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Obviously it was bad for you, but like it wasn't like thought to be, I think about how long after realizing or like understanding just how bad smoking is for you, it took for people to kind of give up smoking, even for them to ban smoking in like restaurants and pubs. You know what I mean?
Well, that's an interesting, like, actually link to what we're talking about, because that was obviously a top-down approach.
Yeah.
Do you think that that was necessary?
I think I'm actually, as a libertarian, in favor of banning smoking in public places.
Interesting.
Because of the externality of the smoke. So where I think government force is justified is in places where the externalities of your behavior impact other people.
Yeah.
And not even necessarily like in a way that's like directly linked to you. Here's a fantastic example of this: is leaded petrol.
Yeah.
Leaded petrol is a great example of like a fantastic regulation. Like, it was putting loads of lead in the soil, the environment. It led to a massive decrease in IQ. There's some theories that led to a massive increase in serial killers.
Okay.
There's women walking around like pregnant, inhaling lead, all the time. Like, this is not like, and like to the driver, like obviously they suffer too to an extent, but like not directly,
Yeah.
in the same way that like, they are suffering, but like they're making everyone else's problem too.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same thing with smoking inside. Like, if you want to smoke outside, God bless, have a good time. Like, I also think they're being too restrictive on smoking, for example.
Okay.
These kind of things where it's like, anyone born after a certain date will never be allowed to buy cigarettes. Is obviously going to fail. A, it's obviously going to fail. But B, it's just like anti-freedom. Like, if you want to smoke cigarettes and hurt yourself, God bless, have a good time, But like, if you really want to end smoking or end drinking, you have to take a cultural approach.
Yeah.
The US did a fantastic job, I mean, like it or not, like of reducing smoking. It's basically through like huge amounts of propaganda.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's the cultural approach. You don't have to propagandize people for a cultural approach either. I think NoFap is a great example of a bottom-up rejection of a culture that encourages consumption of addictive material.